questa qua tua?
Sì, prendimi questa, perché così ti fai il giro in platea. Io intanto devo un attimo lei.
Vi volevo chiedere, cos'è un paio di bottiglie d'acqua con una cartina di produzione? Posso prendere io?
No, lo devi portare io, questo è scherzando. Quanti so?
Una cartina di produzione, un paio di bicchieri.
Andiamo ai morti.
Prova di amplificazione, check 1, 2, 3, prova, sì. Prova, sì. Prova di amplificazione, check 1, 2, 3, prova. Prova, prova. Prova di amplificazione, check 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, prova. Sì, sì. Provo gli altri. Prova di amplificazione, check 1, 2, 3, prova, sì. Prova, sì. Prova di amplificazione, check 1, 2, 3, prova, sì. Prova di amplificazione, prova, prova. Prova, prova, prova. Prova, sì. Prova di amplificazione. Prova, 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 prova. Prova, prova. Prova, 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 prova. Prova, prova, prova. Check 1, 2, 3, prova, sì.
trovare la cisterna.
Capisco benissimo con tutte le ragioni per cui è difficile.
Pieno?
Secondo me blu. No? Strana cosa. Si dice perché evidentemente
Okay. I'm sorry.
Apparently he is the president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
We've met.
Not of the Italian delegation, the entire Parliamentary Assembly.
We met at the NATO Defense College.
Yes, he came to visit us.
Ah, he came already. Ah, so you know everything. So I have about 3-4 minutes, then I pass the floor to you.
I have 3 or 4
And
minutes.
then he has a general comment, and then
Yep.
we'll start with
Okay.
Okay, so this is the usual. Sì, 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 poi io. Okay.
Here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Do you hear me? Yes, thank you very much. You never know when you have a microphone in a known place if it works or not. Even there is a green light here, but you're never sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this conference dealing with the Balkans. And it is the second time that the Foundation does it in 2017. And so the obvious question is, why such an interest? And the answer, it is because the Balkans are a very important part of Europe, very close to us, but not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of history and many other things. The title of this conference is The Balkans at a Crossroads. It is an evocative title, and frankly speaking, we have discovered that this title has been used very recently in other international conferences, and it was not done on purpose. So it is clear that we look forward through a closer integration of the region into Europe and NATO, and it seems to us that this is the only possible political option to ensure long-term security and stability. And therefore, we wish to give our help to those who are working on this option and convince with good arguments those who are still in doubt. To achieve this goal, we think, it is necessary to move ahead, improving regional cooperation, enhancing the rule of law, and open markets. Internal reforms are necessary to reach the final objective. Lack of progress means, among other things, fragmentation and poor statehood. The Atlantic Alliance has invested for a long period of time into Southeastern Europe, with its open door policy, projecting stability and security, ensuring peace. To this day, it keeps an operation in Kosovo under Italian leadership. NATO has been working hand in hand for many years with the European Union, and this is the region where visible cooperation between the two organizations is more evident. Having said that, it is clear that the Balkans have not been at the center of attention with the international community for some years. Perhaps because they were considered to be a solved problem and forgetting its complex history and the specific political situation. We now see today a renewed interest on both sides of the Atlantic, and this is good news, and I'm happy to report about that. And in the past 4 years, there have been yearly European summits devoted to the region, from Berlin to Trieste on July last. Having in mind this background, we have selected for today's and tomorrow's discussion those issues that seem to us to be a priority. Our methodology consists in addressing projects such as this conference, calling for the best international expertise, you have the people here in the first quote, in scientific freedom and respect for different opinions. I confirm that the NATO Defense College Foundation wishes to remain at the core of discussion on strategic issues. And in doing so, we draw from a large network of countries and an extended international expertise, starting with the NATO College itself. I note here that we are gradually enlarging our focus to topics that are not strictly geopolitical, but today conceptually connected. Some friends in the room will be happy about to hear that. I'm speaking about illicit trade, criminal networks, and terrorism. They are very relevant not only for this discussion, but also in a general way, and we will continue to follow this direction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is clear that more than ever, a good reading and a clever analysis of events is important. And traditional separation of issues is not in line with our times anymore. We have to think in a new way. We also believe in clear and concise language to be understood by everybody and not only by specialists. For this reason, the Foundation is making an effort to reach out to a younger audience because strategic issues should be part of normal life. I wish to thank all the speakers who have accepted our invitation here in Rome today and tomorrow, and I thank you all in the audience for attending the event. Tomorrow the conference will be closed by the Honorable Della Vedova, Under Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on behalf of the Italian government. I also wish to thank warmly PMI and those who have contributed to the conference, including Al Arabiya, our media partner. I thank you very much for your attention, and I pass the microphone to the Commandant of the College, at my right, General Chris Wetcross. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador. Ambassadors, ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My perspective is more on the NATO aspect. The 2016 Warsaw Summit affirmed the alliance's interest in the Western Balkans, stating it is a region of strategic importance, and that NATO remains fully committed to the stability and security of the Western Balkans, as well as to supporting the Euro-Atlantic aspirations of the countries in the region. They noted democratic values, rule of law, domestic reforms, and good neighborly relations are vital for regional cooperation and for the Euro-Atlantic integration process. The communiqué from the summit concluded, the alliance will continue to work closely with the Western Balkans to maintain and promote regional and international peace and security. Essentially, what the summit promoted was a continuance of current NATO activity in the Western Balkan region. I will leave it to you to consider whether this is sufficient to meet these emergent issues, such as criminal networks, illegal trafficking, and terrorist groups, as well as outside actors such as Russia, China, and the Gulf states, who may, as one of the conference's sessions suggests, try to take advantage of the situation to improve their spheres of influence. As you consider that question and how to move forward towards a future of social integration, economic development, and political stability, reflecting regional cooperation as other conference sessions will discuss, allow me to briefly summarize NATO's recent history in the Western Balkans for context. The United Nations Protection Force, UNPROFOR, had been unsuccessful in quelling tensions and violence in the civil wars in the Balkans between 1992 and 1995. And in the wake of the catastrophes of Srebrenica and Gorazde, NATO was the force of last resort for the UN to stabilize the region. The Dayton Accord, signed 14 December 1995, facilitated the approval of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1031, authorizing NATO to assume a responsibility for military operations in Bosnia-Herzegovina in UNPROFOR. This was a welcome mission for NATO, who had been searching for a sustainable raison d'etre after the end of the Cold War. Under UNSCR 1031 and NATO's Operation Decisive Endeavor, the alliance effectively began to project power in December 1995 by moving in 60,000 troops rapidly into Bosnia-Herzegovina. They separated rival Federation and Serb entities along an inter-entity boundary line, forced the containment of entity weapons and units under NATO supervision, and achieved stability. The arrival of this implementation force, I4, and the sustainment of forces under the NATO Stabilization Force, for which HIFOR transferred authority in late 1996, brought breathing room to the conflicted region, and allowed international partners such as the United Nations, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and the European Union to attempt to create the social and political mechanisms for enduring stability. This stability was substantially threatened in 1999 with the Kosovo crisis, which saw the second NATO projection of power into the Western Balkans. Once the danger of general war subsided in 2000, largely because of the presence of 50,000 NATO Kosovo force soldiers in a relatively confined geographic space, optimism followed. The face of NATO's stability projections in Bosnia-Herzegovina and into Kosovo changed in the early 2000s from large occupying forces to partnership for peace activities. Most Balkan states accepted NATO partnership and moved to the journey toward eventually NATO and EU membership. Russia and other powerful international players seemingly chose not to spoil these efforts, while large NATO forces remained in the Western Balkans. NATO troop levels in S4 rapidly drew down until it was replaced by the 2,500-strong European Union force Athena in 2004. KFOR was reduced to from 17,000 in 2003 and down to 4,500. The subsequent reduction of missions and mission size for the UN, OSCE, and the EU since 2008 signaled a Western disengagement from the Western Balkans. Today, NATO continues 3 essential activities in the Western Balkans to achieve regional stability and security: operations, partnership programs, and membership processes. Ongoing operations include a presence in Kosovo, liaison mission in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. These operations provide a forward presence to monitor numerous and varied activities of partnership with each nation. Through these missions, the Alliance also continues to encourage each nation to make progress towards NATO membership. I will leave it at that to perhaps whet your appetite for the discussion that is to come, noting the impressive number of participants across the myriad dimensions of the Western Balkans question and whose points of view I very much look forward to hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. Very kind of you to give us this, your thoughts. Now I'm very happy to pass the microphone to the Honorable Paolo Alli, who is the President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Please, Honorable.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, General Whitecross. Thank you for the invitation to this very important conference. I think that the reason you said that opening your speech are quite important, and I think that initiatives like this have to be carried out very often. We do it like that in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, for example, because every year we have several initiatives in the Western Balkans countries, and inside our assembly, we very often draft reports and recommendations for NATO and so on. Personally, as President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, I had the chance to visit practically all the countries in the Western Balkans this year. And so I got more and more the impression, and after speaking with heads of state, heads of government, parliamentarians, and also the civil society many times, I had the chance to understand how many resources the region has and how strategic is this area for Europe and for global security. For Europe, because I think that the European project will not be complete until the full integration of the Western Balkans. The Western Balkans are not outside Europe, they are in the heart of Europe, and the process should be completed in order to complete Europe. But also from the point of view of global security, in the position of the Western Balkans is not affecting only regional security, but also global security. So again, I think that the full integration of the Western Balkans in the Euro-Atlantic community must be, in my opinion, one of our objectives on top of our political agendas. Let me spend just a few words about the process, the historic process of Euro-Atlantic integration of the countries coming from the collapse of the Soviet Union. We see that all the countries, or almost all the countries on the eastern flank of Europe had become members of NATO before joining the European Union. And also in the Western Balkans, except Slovenia, which became member of both in the same year, 2004, we have Croatia, which became member of NATO in 2009 and joined the European Union in 2013. And now we have Albania and Montenegro fully integrated in NATO and not in the European Union, and the other countries still in different positions. The dynamics shows that countries joining NATO before joining the EU had considered security as their first issue. And now this point could be in some way reversed in some situations. Let's take Serbia. I had a long conversation with President Vučić. Serbia is not willing, people there is not willing to join NATO, even if they have a strong cooperation with NATO at military level. But some propaganda, some narrative says to the people in Serbia that as all the countries in the Western Balkans joined NATO before joining the European Union, so they say that NATO membership is a precondition for EU membership. And that's not true, of course. But this is used by somebody to stop both the integration in EU and the integration in NATO. So I think that, politically speaking, we have to consider that in some cases, in some situations, particularly Serbia, but probably maybe also in the other countries, I don't know, Bosnia, it's a bit different story as we know, the process could be reversed. So, I mean, joining the European Union could be the way to also join NATO in the future. And if we consider other countries not members of the Western Balkans, like Georgia or Ukraine, this could also be a way to speed up the integration in the Western community of those countries, because we know that there it is very hard to think that in a short time they could become members of NATO. So the political consequence of this, in my opinion, is that the cooperation between NATO and the European Union, or vice versa, has been great, but must be even stronger in the Western Balkans. If there is not a full cooperation between EU and NATO, we will not succeed in completing the Euro-Atlantic integration of the Western Balkans. So I think this must be kept on top of the agenda of our countries in Europe, of our countries in NATO, and this is a reason why I fully agree with this initiative of NATO Defense College Foundation. Of course, let me spend just one word about Bosnia-Herzegovina, just to say something which I saw with my eyes and I heard with my ears. We know the situation there, which comes from the Dayton agreements, and still there is this vetoes between the three ethnies ruling the country. And the membership action plan for NATO membership still did not start, because there are some conditions set up by NATO, particularly the transfer of the military properties from the army to the government, which are not still completed, but they are not completed by one of the three components, the Serbian component. So this condition which NATO poses for starting the membership action plan is really transforming in a veto, practical veto from one component on the others. I spoke to Secretary General Stoltenberg several times about this issue, and I think that from a political point of view, we should find a way to send the ball in the other field and find some political solution in order to start the membership action plan, because the reaction of people in Bosnia is, look, NATO is not giving you the map, NATO is not willing that Bosnia joins the Euro-Atlantic community, so they try to blame us for for posing those preconditions. And this is not good, because who is taking advantage of that are external actors. And this happens not only in Bosnia, unfortunately, also in other parts of the Western Balkans, but in Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly the Saudi Arabia is making huge investments and supporting the Islamic component of the population, which gives a rise to a high risk of radicalization. This is my view, not complete. I did not speak about Kosovo or Macedonia, but I don't want to go in detail. But I want to give you some how to say, flash about some situation. But what is now the responsibility? I have spoken about the responsibility of NATO and the EU in opening doors, projecting stability, as NATO is saying since some years in the region. But of course, there is a homework also for the countries of the Western Balkans. We know that there are still problems, still big problems, even if many improvements have been done in the past years. But of course, you will discuss, I've seen the program of the conference about illegal trafficking, organized crime, corruption, human rights, and so on, including also terrorism, foreign fighters, and so on. So there is a need for the reforms. For this reason, I think that your initiative is very timely. You will discuss about reforms, institutional reforms, economic reform, infrastructures, and everything, and also from the point of view of justice. I think that we have to work together and support our friends in the Western Balkans in order that our common values, the common values of the Western community, could be stronger and stronger in the Western Balkans. And from the side of those countries, more cooperation is needed in the region. Less isolation, less individualism at the national level, more cooperation. I think that there are some common challenges also, for example, how to face some external propaganda, particularly from Russia or from other countries, influencing the cultural environment in the Western Balkans, but that is one of the issues. Let me just conclude with a few words about the role of our NATO Parliamentary Assembly. It's an opportunity to make some advertisement for NATO PA, because, so you forgive me for that. Well, I think that parliamentary diplomacy is increasing in its importance in these very complicated days in this global environment. Very often, the dialogue between two governments or among different governments is not so free as it can be among parliamentarians. So an assembly like ours is giving a great contribution in terms of reassurance of our friends and partners, but also in terms of information to our parliaments about what is happening in the different parts, and particularly we are speaking now of the Western Balkans. My good friend Miro Kovac knows quite well what we are doing and the effort we are also putting in making conferences, seminars in the Western Balkans, in order to show that NATO is present there not only at military level, but also at political level, because NATO is a political and military organization based on common values. And when we go with our assembly to make seminars or or assemblies in those countries, it's a way to show that we are close to them also from a political point of view and not only from a military point of view. And I conclude my speech just underlining that in our assembly we have started a special group on education and communication. I think that informing people correctly about security, what is security now? Security today is completely different than 5 years ago. People must understand that we have to pay for security. For security is not for granted. This goes through a long education process in the schools, in the media, because we as members of our parliaments have, for example, the responsibility to take the decision about increasing the budget for defense. We are speaking about burden sharing in NATO since several years. Okay. If we are not able to explain to our people, starting from the new generation, that security is not for free, security must be paid, sorry for this bad expression, we have to pay more for our security, then we will not succeed. We will, every time we go in our parliaments and we discuss about the defense expenditure, we listen people saying, you are wasting our money. So we need education. And I think that institutions like the NATO Defense College Foundation, and of course the NATO Defense College as a structure of education, are absolutely crucial in these very complicated times. Thank you again for your invitation, and have a good session.
Thank you. I think you have had good introductory remarks by Onorevole, who is acquiring a lot of experience in the field. He is very passionate about what he's doing. And I think we can start with the first panel. Let's go to work.
Bulgaria. Югославия са Бугарска. Югославия са Бугарска. Я. И гречко.
Good afternoon. My name is Dimitri Rupel. I have contributed a short CV for the materials that you had received for this conference, so I don't want to repeat myself or to waste precious time. Now, we have a very interesting group of people here. Let me give you the names. On my left side is Mr. Miro Kovac, who is at present chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Zagreb. He was Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia for some time, and he will give us some, I would say, important Croatian perspective of the crossroads and the future of Western Balkans and, of course, European Union. Further to the left is Mr. Yanis Alexis Zepos.
No. This is the latest.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ljubomir Kjuchukov.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I got this program today.
Some kind of sabotage. Sabotage.
Okay. Mr. Kjuchukov is director of an institute called Economics and International Relations Institute in Sofia. He represents the Bulgarian perspective or aspect of the problem, which is subject matter of this conference. On my right, I'm glad to see again Mr. Ivan Vejvoda, who is I would say an old, well, not old, but an old acquaintance and a very experienced diplomat who is also a permanent fellow of the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. And last but not least, Jelena Milic, who is director of Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies. I went through your CV, and I simply do not have time to give all the details and all the positions that you have had and you have. I'm so glad that you could join us. Now, this is a very, I would say, interesting and important combination. We have here some representatives or members of a society that used to be, I would say, at the center of Western Balkans, Yugoslavia. We have, well, on top of myself, who am a Slovenian, we have a Croat and a Serb, and of course we have extended this company also a little further to the southeast. Now, let me first start with our Croatian colleague, Mr. Kovac. I have prepared a long introduction to this discussion, but I shall try to be a little bit shorter. Our topic, as you have noticed, is Western Balkans at a crossroads. I guess that the Western Balkans have experienced quite a number of crossroads in the past, in its history. After World War I, I would say that the Western Balkans have been confronted with the choice between two concepts of Yugoslavia, Slovenian-Croatian concept and the Serbian concept of Yugoslavia. I would say a choice between unitary and plural society. After World War II, we had I'm not sure if I express myself correctly, but it seemed at the time that Yugoslav nation or South Slav nations had the choice between democracy and communist society. Then the third crossroads, or the third moment in history, which I find very important, of course, was the year 1990. Now, the year 1990 is the year that Philip Bobbitt has defined as the year of the end of World War I. He chose the year 1990 because this was the year when the Paris Charter has been issued, or shall I say, agreed upon. This is the Paris Charter on New Europe. And what we had there was a choice or dilemma between self-determination of nations and democracy on one side and military dictatorship on the other. But I think that perhaps the most important moment for Western Balkans is coming today, or shall I say not just for Western Balkans but also for the European Union. European Union is at a crossroads, I would say. The issues or the dilemmas are, shall we have enlargement or not? Shall we have deepening or not? Can European Union be a global player or not? Should we try again to write a new constitution for the European Union? Shall we conceive European Union as a United Nations of Europe or something else? Now let me end by quoting or by mentioning President of the EU Commission, Mr. Juncker, who expressed his fear recently that the European Union would be growing out of proportion. He even mentioned the number, the figure 95. Of course, this was in reference to independence of Catalonia. Of course, we are not speaking about Catalonia today. We are speaking about Western Balkans. Slovenia and Croatia have already joined, and there are, of course, other Western Balkan nations that are waiting to join us. Now, the question for you, Mr. Kovac, is how do you see historical development and present challenges concerning crossroads and perspectives from Croatian perspective? And in the end, of course, I cannot avoid mentioning, of course, the problem of the role of the ICTI and the issue of General Praljak. This is for you.
Yes. Please. Thank you so much, Minister Ruppel. I would like first to thank President Minuto Russo for inviting me. I was supposed to be here in Rome in the spring of this year. Unfortunately, I had to cancel my visit because of some obligation in the Croatian Parliament. There was a vote in which I had to participate. So sorry once again, and thank you for inviting me nonetheless. I'm really happy to be today in Rome. Mi sento bene qui in Italia, a Roma. I'd like to share 5 thoughts with you, dear Minister. My first thought is something which was already mentioned by my friend Paolo Ali. If you look at the Western Balkans countries, you will easily conclude, if you look at the map of Europe, that these countries are surrounded by EU member states and by NATO member states. That means that these countries are in the stomach of the European Union. They are in our stomach. Which are the countries which surround the Western Balkans? You have Croatia, Italy, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Hungary. All these countries are EU member states and NATO member states. So logically, it is our job to take care of these countries. We should not be, how should I put it, astonished that foreign powers are present in that region. They are present, it is true. We have Russia, we have also now China, we have Muslim countries, we have Turkey. But if you look at the EU member states, you will also easily conclude that these foreign powers are also present economically in the rest of the European continent. If you look at, I don't know, Germany, you look at Austria, Hungary, Croatia, and all these countries, you also have the presence of Russia, of China, of Turkey, of Muslim countries. You have soccer clubs in the EU which are owned by people stemming from these countries. So it's nothing unusual. The unusual thing is that we do not really take care of the Western Balkans and that we complain about the presence of these foreign powers. The problem is that these states are quite weak, fragile, and that is why the foreign presence is felt more strongly than perhaps in the rest of the European continent. So, but for us, it could be a success story to do much more in the in the Western Balkans as European member states. So, at a relatively low cost, we can have a success story in a situation which is not very easy because of the immigration crisis we had to confront with, Brexit still going on, and of course the financial crisis. So we have a chance, we have a possibility to do something in the Western Balkans for the Western Balkans, but also for the European Union to show that we can manage and solve problems. My second thought relates to what is going on in the European Union when it comes to the Western Balkans. Good things are going on. Things are changing. So after 7 years, we had a discussion in the European Council in March this year about the Western Balkans, and the European perspective was reaffirmed. We had in September a speech from Mr. Juncker, the Commission President, a very optimistic speech when it comes to the future of the Western Balkans, and he announced that there would be a strategy by the end of 2018 for 2 countries negotiating on EU membership, Serbia and Montenegro. So the European Commission is also becoming more enthusiastic. And we have our friends from Bulgaria. I was in Sofia a week ago. We paid a visit with the Foreign Affairs Committee. We also met 2 ministers in the government. One of the priorities of the Bulgarian presidency is to deal with the Western Balkans. So there's going to be a summit in May next year in Sofia about the Western Balkans. So we have now much more attention for the Western Balkans in the European Union, which is a good thing. Thirdly, and then if you look at the presidencies which will follow Bulgaria, we have in 2018, after Bulgaria, we have Austria, a country which normally also should pay attention to the Western Balkans. Then we have in 2019 Romania. I suppose that our friends from Romania, and I see our friend, the former minister Comunescu, also with us. I'm sure I was in Romania also recently with Paolo Ali. I'm sure that Romania will also pay attention to the Western Balkans. And then comes Finland, and then Croatia and Germany in 2020. And after Croatia and Germany, Portugal and Slovenia. So we have basically at least 4 presidencies which should be motivated when it comes to the Western Balkans. My third thought relates to the US. Things are changing there too. I would say in the last 6-7 years, there has been no real attention when it comes to the Western Balkans in the US. There was a continuous work, but not too much engagement. There was a conference last week in Washington organized by the Atlantic Council, very interesting, and 6 ministers for foreign affairs were there, of the Western Balkans countries. And there was a very important study which was published 3 weeks ago by Daniel Server at the Council on Foreign Relations, which I really wholeheartedly recommend, on the 8th of November. Things are changing. Things are changing in the US, and we have a clear basis for cooperation with NATO when it comes to the Western Balkans. We have the Treaty on the European Union, which clearly says that there has to be compatibility between the European Union and NATO when it comes to the common foreign and security policy for the common security and defense policy. So things are changing in the US for the better. There should be much more engagement, and that is why I believe that things will go in the right direction. Mr. Server, in his study, which I really recommend, stressed which could be the triggering incidents for a crisis in the Western Balkans. I'll quote some of them. In an independence referendum in Republika Srpska, an incident concerning the Serb population in Kosovo, a possible fighting between Albanians and Macedonians, a terrorist attack or political assassination with an Islamic background, and a possible Russian destabilization of Macedonia or Montenegro. So we can, with a joint US-EU effort, prevent these things from taking place. So my fourth thought clearly stresses the need for an intense cooperation between the European Union and NATO, for which we have a legal base when it comes to the European Union. Only together we can achieve a transformation of the Western Balkans countries and integrating them into the European Union and NATO for those countries which want to become members of NATO. There is a very good study, which I also recommend, published by David Kanan in 2013, in which he makes a comparison between the Western Balkans and the Middle East. And you will easily conclude that the influences are similar in the Western Balkans and the Middle East, and we should do something together to impose ourselves when it comes to the Western Balkans. When you look at the countries in the Western Balkans, I already mentioned Serbia and Montenegro, which are basically moving in the right direction when it comes to EU membership. We have Macedonia and Albania, which could start their negotiations with the European Union in 2018. Kosovo is a very specific case because we still have a state-building effort there, so it will take some time for them to start negotiations. And then we have Bosnia and Herzegovina, which clearly, as our friend Paul Ali mentioned, is the biggest problem in the Western Balkans. The two biggest problems were, until recently, Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Macedonia is moving in the right direction. The deputy prime minister was in Zagreb recently from an Albanian party. Very solid, very structured, very motivated. So my feeling is, our feeling is in Croatia that Macedonia is moving in the right direction. But Bosnia and Herzegovina is a big, big problem. And we should do much more to assist the country to become a country based upon the rule of law. I'll give you one example why this is not the case. So we have a constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The constitution is part of the Dayton Peace Accords. 3 countries signed the Dayton Peace Accords: Bosnia and Herzegovina itself, Croatia, and the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, today Serbia. So these 3 countries signed the Dayton Peace Accords, and they have the obligation to promote the fulfillment in concerning the implementation of the Constitution. We have 6 witnesses of the Dayton Peace Accords: the US, the UK, France, Germany, the European Union, Russia. The Constitution says that there is a constitutional court, and that the decisions by the Constitutional Court are binding and finite. So the Constitutional Court has thus far issued more than 70 decisions, which have not been implemented. One of them relates to the electoral law. So in December last year, the Constitutional Court issued a decision saying that the electoral law has to be amended to make sure that the three constituent peoples, the Croats, the Serbs, and the Bosniaks, that they be equal in the electoral process. Thus far, they have not, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, been able to implement the decision made by the Constitutional Court. So if a country is a country based upon the rule of law, normally it should implement decisions made by the Constitutional Court. It hasn't yet happened. So we have to help our friends in Bosnia and Herzegovina to implement decisions made by the Constitutional Court. Because otherwise, as Mr. Insko said recently, he's the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there may be a problem concerning the constitution of a new government after the elections in 2018 in October. So that's a problem of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is not a functional state, and we have to do something together to make it functional, of course, based upon the Dayton Peace Accords. And my final thought, my fifth thought concerns the future. I am personally, nonobstant the problems we are facing in the Western Balkans, an optimist. I think that we will be able, with a joint effort, to pacify in the long run these countries and integrate them in the European Union and in NATO, for those of them who will be interested in becoming NATO members. And it is really a chance for us to, in a certain way, prove to ourselves that we can westernize the countries on the, politically of course, the countries on the European continent which are in our stomach. And now I will try to give an answer concerning the question of Minister Ruppel when it comes to the ICTY. There was a decision last week concerning 6 accused from Bosnia and Herzegovina who are all Croats there. And there was a suicide committed by one of the accused. And there was some turmoil going on, of course, because of that, which is understandable, because committing suicide in a court is something unusual in front of cameras. Basically, I would say that things have calmed down. Our government has been in close contact also with the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and there was how should I put it, some exaggerated interpretation also in our press, but I think that the things have calmed down, and that basically in the long run we should try to establish some kind of region-wide reconciliation effort and a truth effort to make sure that people understand what was going on during the 90s, who started the wars, and why we had so many victims in the former Yugoslavia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Kovac. The next speaker will be Dr. Professor Ivan Vejvoda. He comes from Serbia, and I have a rather complex question for you, Ambassador. Now, if I remember correctly, when Yugoslavia started falling apart, one of my interlocutors at that time, coming from Italy actually, and he was foreign minister, by the way, said, look, Yugoslavia should not fall apart. If Yugoslavia falls apart, then there will be new countries, and each of these new countries would ask to have a commissioner in the European Commission. It's like France splitting into 10 countries, and then France would ask for 10 commissioners in the European Union. Now, my question really concerns the problem of the crowd, the problem of too many members of the European Union. I don't know, maybe also NATO. The President of the European Commission recently has expressed some doubts about further enlargement of the European Union. I have in my papers here, he has said in the European Parliament, if I'm not mistaken, that there would be no enlargement before 2025, not during his mandate. Now, do you think, Ambassador, that situation would be easier today in European Union and in the world generally if Yugoslavia had continued and not fallen apart into some states that today are already members of the European Union, others are not, and some of them are fighting to become members, and they have great problems in trying to become members. Some of the former Yugoslav republics have great reservations about becoming members of NATO, also because of the experiences that were not very pleasant in 1999. So what do you think? I would like to add one more remark, which is a debate that started already quite a time ago in 1994 between, well, in Germany by people like, well, he's now, or he used to be Minister of Finance of Germany, Schäuble, and his colleague Lammers. They asked the question, should European Union enlarge or it should first deepen? Now, deepening means, of course, concentration, and enlargement means, in a way, crowd, or as Juncker has said, too many members. Now, European Union enlarged during the last, well, 25 years, quite a lot, also NATO. But as far as NATO was concerned, you must remember that until 1997, it seemed that 3 new members were enough. I remember very well because Slovenia was rejected at that time. Only after September 11, 2001, a new wave of enlargement became possible. So, if there was no terrorism, no attack in New York on September 11, if there was no Yugoslav crisis, and by the way, if there was no falling apart of Soviet Union in 1991, would life be easier, Ambassador?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And you mentioned our long acquaintance that goes back to the early 80s at other times and through a wonderful literary journal at that time. The answer, in my sense, is very simple. Yes, life would have been simpler, but we're dealing in counterfactuals, and it did not happen. I believe that we were part of a group that met in Ljubljana in '89 talking about civil society with a number of people from all over the former Yugoslavia, where we were then, before all of this happened, advocating for a democratic country, for more rule of law, for freedom of speech, for freedom of association, for human rights. Clearly, what I would very simply call a group of intelligentsia from former Yugoslavia was not enough to move the first and the second Yugoslavia to a third democratic Yugoslavia. And the result thus is that we have 7 countries that were one. I myself, if you allow me a very short autobiographical digression, was a Yugoslav because I come from a mixed family. I have Croatian, Serbian roots, Austrian, Czech. My name is Czech. So it was something that one had to confront with the strong nationalist wave that was something that we thought was an exception to the rule because everybody was returning to Europe at that moment. The countries that were occupied by the Warsaw Pact with Soviet troops on their territory, the main slogan was to see the back of Boris, the Soviet soldier. And they had a very clear goal, and that goal was achieved, whereas we in the former Yugoslavia, who had a huge advantage, because remember, we had relations with the European community since 1978, and the then Prime Minister Ante Markovic began negotiating in Brussels of Yugoslavia joining, and we were the first in line, given that we were the most advanced country outside of the Warsaw Pact. But all that is history, and things went pear-shaped, and we descended into a complete catastrophe with huge loss of life. And we have come out of that, each country in its own way. We in Serbia, it took us 10 years to defeat Milosevic, our authoritarian leader. And then we embarked on a belated transition to democracy. And as other countries have had a rocky road and a roller coaster that is still being pursued. But the key thing, and I underscore and agree with most of what Miro Kovac said, we've come a long way. The EU is really the key priority of all of these countries. Basically, it's only Serbia who has qualms about joining NATO. But I think the key historical fact is that our countries that have been, as you rightly put it, at a crossroads throughout history, for the first time able to choose with our own free will whom we want to join. This has not happened in history because we were the object of imperial policies and occupations. And I think this is what is basically now being used in a different way by Russian propaganda, who is saying to the countries, and to Serbia in particular, they want to make you join the EU, or they want to make you join NATO. And this was particularly clear in the case of Montenegro, but Montenegro had the courage as a country, a society, and a leadership to clearly state what they wanted, and it was of their free will, not because somebody imposed anything. So I think that is often forgotten, and I think that needs to be repeated all the time. You mentioned the Vilnius group, which had such a key role to play after the first 3 countries joined and bringing the other countries. I think the Adriatic Charter is an important group to mention, which brings the countries that want to join. Serbia is an observing country, and I think it's these kind of regional organizations that actually spell out the ways in which the countries cooperate. The regional cooperation is extremely intense, and unfortunately, because this is good news, it doesn't ever make the news, because it's only bad news that makes the news. And just to mention one example, the heads of military intelligence of all our countries meet twice a year through the auspices of the Regional Cooperation Council that's based in Sarajevo, and that's run by our friend Goran Svilanovic at this moment. People don't know this. They have very frank and open discussions, not to mention all the relations that exist at the level of education, culture, and the private discussions that negotiating teams that are entering the European Union are having with each other. People working on this in Belgrade call up their Croatian colleagues by phone and say, how did you solve this problem? Nothing official. Same with Montenegrins, same with Slovenians. We have Slovenian advisors in Serbia working with our negotiating team. So I think this is really what tells the difference of where we were about 15 years ago and where we are today. And clearly NATO has a key role in this whole process of moving forward, as the title of our panel says. I believe that everybody acknowledges the importance of the role that NATO is playing in the region. Just 3 weeks ago, we had a kind of a NATO fest in Serbia, first with President Vucic's visit to Brussels, a meeting with Jens Stoltenberg. Then Jelena Milic organized a conference on NATO in Serbia, where I was one of the participants. We had the US commander of US troops in Europe, General Hodges. And then finally on that Friday, there was a joint military exercise of US and Serbian parachutists, about 100 of them or more, with the presence of the US ambassador and the president. So again, this did not hit the headlines, but I think it shows the, if I may put it very simply, the clear Western leaning of the country, and the repeated, in all of the countries, orientation towards the European Union. And as Miro Kovac said, this is a chance now for Europe and the Western Alliance, meaning the US and Europe, to show leadership in finishing off, as it's called in Washington, the unfinished business in the Western Balkans. And I think the conference, I believe that Jelena attended, I was invited but couldn't attend, in Washington by the Atlantic Council, and the paper that was published by Damon Wilson and his friends there is a sign of the, let's again put it simply, of the wake-up that has come about in Washington, but also in the EU, with the fact that the commitment given in Thessaloniki in 2003 that the Western Balkans would become members, in the famous words of Romano Prodi, without ifs and buts, when they meet the conditions, is actually on the road. And I would add that the statement by Mr. Juncker that 2025 is a realistic goal is a response to a plea from the region: give us a date, give us an outlook of how this can move forward, because the reverse of the famous enlargement fatigue in the European Union is what Prime Minister Edi Rama, I would say creatively, called patience fatigue. There needs to be, like a student enrolling in university, you need to know that in 4 years you can get a diploma. I think there's a realistic now horizon, and by all accounts, the European Council in the coming days will give a repeated strong statement along those lines. So the countries know this is possible if you meet the conditions, if you fulfill the requirements, basically Copenhagen criteria and the chapters. And I think this gives really energy to those who are in the engine of state administration. They are motivated more if there's a clear outlook that they can get a result. Without wanting to take too much time, I'd just like to add a few things. The NATO enlargement is absolutely key, and as I said, the Montenegrin membership, although belated, was extremely important. Bringing over the Euro-Atlantic security roof over the region is essential to maintaining peace. Clearly, people like our friend Dan Server need to work on worst-case scenarios. But at the same time, I would like to say that, and being cautiously optimistic, of course, given everything that's happened in the past, I don't think we will have a new conflict in the region. We did that 15 years ago or 10 years ago, whichever timeline you want to come. Nobody wants to go there. The citizens don't want to go there. The leaderships don't want to go there. And especially everyone knows the huge cost that has been paid for that. And of course, politicians, because of their own political domestic reasons, are sometimes playing with fire. And we know those who most play with that fire, and that's very dangerous. And we mustn't neglect the danger of that kind of rhetoric. But at the same time, we've seen that whenever there's been a bout of fever in the region or in bilateral relations, things have calmed down relatively quickly over the course of these years of the regional political situation. And I think that is what we can expect. I would like to highlight as an example the meeting that the Croatian president, Ms. Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, had with then Prime Minister Vučić, where they drew up a 5-point plan. I think that is a testimony of leadership. Those kinds of things that maybe are out of the box for some others in our respective countries or the region are what need to be done. And Prime Minister Zaev in Macedonia, and I believe you mentioned him, is an example of that, that things can turn around positively overnight when Macedonia looked in a very bad situation. Now, I would like to add to everything that's been said that we need to see how our Macedonian friends and our Greek friends can finally resolve this burdensome issue of the name of Macedonia, because that has been a key impediment to Macedonia moving forward. Although it was the first candidate of this group of countries for the European Union, it's been in endless map cycles and was actually mature to joining at the Strasbourg-Kiel summit of NATO, along with Croatia and Albania, but got stuck in a limbo, in a status quo that we saw how detrimental it was. Now, the Macedonian government is keen on pursuing a solution. We'll see, because as we know, the political cycles of elections are out there, whether this is possible. But even if the name is not resolved, let's try and see to it and help Macedonia enter NATO under its FYROM name. Because I think it's essential to have that roof, the Euro-Atlantic roof, move over Macedonia as well. And then that leaves just a sliver of countries to be joined. But key for the, I would say, both the EU peace project, but the Euro-Atlantic peace project as well. And I will finish, although there are obviously much more things to say, but maybe in the Q&A we can address it, two sort of things that are both important for the present, short term, but also for the long term, and that was your question on the ICTY. I believe that if we are serious about the democratic nature and foundations of our countries and the rule of law, we must do the hard work of confronting the past and to state clearly what was done in our name by our then governments. Nobody can shy away from that, and we can discuss endlessly, you know, who is to blame and what the portion of blame is, but clearly everyone participated in one way or another. I think that, and you mentioned the Bosnian Croats. Of course, the trial before that was for Ratko Mladic, who was condemned for 11 counts, and of course the main count of committing genocide in Srebrenica. This is a key milestone in international criminal justice. We have all known for many years what Ratko Mladic and his troops did. Some of us have been very clear about this, about what that meant and that it was genocide. But, and this is my second point, this needs to go into our respective history books in elementary schools and high schools, because this is the basis of the values of democracy and liberal democracy that we are keen on deepening so that we can have a consolidated form of democracy. Easier said than done, undoubtedly, and we have seen by the reactions in the population, by the far rights in our respective countries, that this is not easy, but this is again what leadership is about. The tone has to come from the top. Our civil societies have been engaged already, even during the conflicts, but now it's a question of taking it forward, of course, with the help and within the framework of the Euro-Atlantic Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Bulgaria and Slovenia at one point, late 90s, were in the same boat as far as NATO was concerned. I remember very well because I was ambassador to the United States, and occasionally I had a chance to speak to American, high officials and advisors and diplomats, one of them being Zbig Brzezinski. And of course, I was lobbying for Slovenia to become a member of NATO, and I was trying to persuade him that Slovenia was a good candidate. And you know what he answered to me? He said, "Look, if we need Slovenia, we occupy you. If we need your territory, we just occupy you. We don't need you Slovenia as a member." Now, then, of course, things changed in 2001, and then the Vilnius group that was mentioned has been established, and Slovenia and Bulgaria and Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia and Slovakia joined NATO. But then came the year 2008. And in 2008, there was a summit in Bucharest. And it was a very interesting summit because Americans were in favor of extending membership action plan to countries like Georgia and Ukraine. And of course, they were prepared to support the membership of Macedonia. And only Albania and Croatia were more or less, accepted. Now, my question to you, Ambassador, is, do you think if at that summit in 2008, NATO had accepted Ukraine and Georgia, or extended membership action plan to those countries, the atrocities that happened afterwards in the second half of 2008, Russia invaded Georgia, as you know, and then in a couple of years, another occupation happened, meaning Ukraine, meaning Crimea, and so on. Do you think that if we managed to change or to adopt a different kind of conclusion, different kind of agreement in Bucharest, then these things in Georgia and in Ukraine and elsewhere didn't happen, would not happen?
Oh, thank you. Not an easy question, and it's very difficult to speak about ifs in politics, to speculate about what might have happened if something had happened. But I really believe that some of the decisions during the Bucharest summit were not good enough or didn't go far enough, especially as far as our region is concerned. I mean Macedonia, the Republic of Macedonia, which was not accepted as a member of NATO at that period. And still I think that, well, Bulgaria played a role by the way at that summit, because it was we that insisted that in the final declaration of the Bucharest summit, it was included that after the solution of the name issue between Greece and the Republic of Macedonia, Macedonia will not have to apply again and start the procedure from the very beginning, but there should be some automatic procedure after that for Macedonia to join NATO. I'd also like to make 4, not 5, 4 points about what NATO and what the European Union mean for the region and what's the importance of that. But I'd rather start with a statement, or rather a diagnosis, because from my point of view, the Western Balkans suffer from a kind of disease, a dangerous and maybe a contagious disease, a disease that I call AIDS, an augmented EU deficiency syndrome. And
AIDS, once again.
AIDS, augmented EU deficiency syndrome, because the diversion of the dominant drive of the European Union, and staying on the medical grounds, this is another syndrome, the 3G syndrome, from enlargement to internal arrangements was logical, it was necessary, but it should not degrade the enlargement, and enlargement means completing the unification of the continent to a secondary issue. It will be disastrous for both the region and the continent if the question when is reduced to an if, as it was mentioned here. So my first point, the goal, the obvious goal, it's EU and NATO membership. In fact, EU and NATO are everything that a Western Balkan or a Balkan country could strive for. It means peace, and we should not forget that. It means security, it means stability, it means values, it means decent and prosperous life. For Southeast European countries succeeding to the European Union, it seems to be the only long-term solution for century-old rivalries, ethnic, religious, political, cultural tensions, conflicts, nationalisms, and territorial clashes, dissolving them into an unity that where even borders, until recently, unfortunately, were irrelevant. So integration of the Western Balkans means also security and stability for Europe as well, and for the region. And also, Europe, the European Union, cannot pretend to be an authentic global player with a kind of black hole in Europe. My second point, the process and the act. The process of accession is at least as important as the act and the fact of becoming a EU member, because it means reforms, it means covering criteria, it means adaptation, it means public efforts and engagement. The negotiations, there are political process. They are not a technocratic exercise. And I believe that we need a more strategic thinking and approach towards the Western Balkan integration. My third point, the alternatives. I'll concentrate on two alternatives, one real and one artificial. The first one is Russia, the elephant in the room, or maybe I would rather say the bear in the region. Well, this, from my point of view, is the artificial alternative. Russia has always been a factor in the Balkans for the last 2.5 centuries. But Russia has never been an alternative for the countries in the region for the last 2.5 decades, because all have declared their Euro-Atlantic integration as their strategic goal. Russia does not offer an ideological alternative. And it's not by chance that the main partners, Russian partners in Europe, are the parties coming from the far right. Russia lacks the economic potential, apart from the energy resources, that could guarantee a substantial political influence in the region. But paradoxically, Russia acquires certain artificial, secondary, geopolitical alternativeness from the confrontation. And that's the moment when an artificial alternative could turn into a very real and serious risk. Because a vacuum always tends to be filled by external actors or factors. The other alternative, which is the real one, the Western Balkan countries faced a very complex task to accommodate two contradictory processes into a kind of strategic unity and find a solution between them. The first one, I call it border building. That's affirming their newly acquired statehood, affirming their sovereignty, and border pulling down, preparing for the integration into the European Union and transforming its sometimes still immature sovereignty, transferring into the EU. And in the process of dismantling a multinational confederation and dividing the common political, economic, and cultural space of ex-Yugoslavia, they now have to build new national states, which inevitably led to the rise of nationalisms. In the same time, they have to preserve and try to preserve the multi-ethnic tolerance. So, the EU's disengagement from the region for a certain period threatens to destroy this fragile balance between the two. And the disintegration of the ex-Yugoslavia made much more visible the existing ethnic and religious dividing lines, underlying the lack of concurrence between ethnic spaces and state borders. In other words, the existence of large minorities in practically all states, not only in the former Yugoslavia, but also in all the Balkan countries. And the attitude towards national, ethnic, and religious minorities in each country will be crucial for the future stability of the region. And it might easily turn the whole region into a zone of instability, new nationalisms, and awakened revanchisms, which in fact happens all over Eastern Europe, both in countries members of the European Union and non-members of the European Union, my own country being part of that list, of course, because in each and every country there are such nationalistic tendencies. And another characteristic feature of the region that's, I think, quite important, the existence of very specific ethno-national axis. For example, and that goes with practically all the countries, Greece and Cyprus, Turkey and Northern Cyprus, Bulgaria and the Republic of Macedonia, Romania and Moldova, Albania and Kosovo, and so on, which is often the cause for tensions and conflicts rather than serving as bridges for cooperation. And although the relationship within each axis, with each pair differs substantially, generally this pairing is more a cause for tensions. So my second point, and that's the real problem, the alternatives for the Western Balkans are Euro integration or nationalisms. My final point, the horizon. The time factor is becoming more and more important. And what President Juncker stated in the beginning of his mandate, that there will be no accession till 2020, in fact carried no surprise in terms of timing, but it was counterproductive. It was a blow to reforms. It deprived countries of impetus and horizon for cohesive reforms and for joint effort. And although for quite a long period integration and enlargement was not a plausible cause in the European Union, we should keep the process alive. And one final statement on that issue. Bulgaria is taking over the EU presidency in 1 month's time. And it has declared the Western Balkan integration as its main priority of the presidency. I'm happy that this was done, but I wish it was done sooner and in more coherent and comprehensive manner. And from my point of view, the goal should be to reassess the Thessaloniki agenda, to generate policies, to reinvigorate processes so that we could speak about a roadmap towards integration. I personally like the notion, the idea of crossroads, because it looks much better than the no road ahead sign. But it's important always to keep in mind the final destination.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Jelena Milic from Belgrade. As I told you before we started this conference, I would like you to speak whatever you want to speak about. But let me, regardless of that, still give you some sort of starting point, namely the general and common problem of the successor states of Soviet Union and Yugoslavia is difficult transition from the old order to an order based on human rights, on democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of economic initiative, competition, meritocracy, and so on. And the commonplace observation, of course, is, and I'm sure that you have come across that communists have converted to capitalism and nationalism. How would you comment on that?
I'll choose my topics, if it's still okay with you. First of all, I'm really very pleased to be here today, and I would like to use this opportunity to express not only mine, but Centro for Euro-Atlantic Studies gratitude to NATO Defense College Foundation and to Mr. Minutoric in particular for being a great host at our Belgrade NATO week event. And I think that we did make some kind of small progress in the right direction, and that the atmosphere somehow in Serbia is kind of gaining a good momentum after a year or two of some kind of pretty tense situation, if I may say so. And I really hope that the Center and your Strategic Balkans project will continue to cooperate on that one. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss broader history aspects. I just reminded me that more than 10 years ago, I actually wrote a part of the book published by Johns Hopkins and Daniel Server, in which I, made some kind of distinctions between the history and conditionalities in which Eastern European countries' accession to NATO and EU happened in comparison what is still in front of Western Balkans. And I highlighted the fact, yes, we also had the authoritarian regime, soft authoritarian regime inheritance to deal with, but I think that the legacy of bloody 90s, so burdened with war crimes, was this distinction that, really limit Eastern, now members of the EU and NATO, Eastern European countries' accession to EU and NATO, to Western Balkans countries' experience. And I think that the way Montenegro did it in a new geopolitical circumstances, with the revisionist Russia being very present now, and the way they addressed their issue of being part of the country which was bombed by NATO and which also suffered from the civilian casualties, is the key experience that Serbia now and Bosnia and Macedonia to a certain extent, and in whatever form Kosovo, should actually learn from, regardless whether we just opt to become members of the NATO or whether we would like to continue and improve cooperation with NATO, as is stated by a current Serbian government. And I think it's really a positive message coming from Serbia as well, and coming from NATO as well. Having said that, the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies published several months ago our new report called Basic Instinct, Case for More Political NATO Engagement in the Region, where we have tried to be complementary with some excellent processes happening in the region, like Berlin process and whatever is going under the radar, as Mr. Vojvoda has mentioned, with regard to Regional Cooperation Council, and being in sync with some good reports about the Western Balkans that have been published recently, that highlighted some of the big problems that the region is facing. But we thought, okay, maybe these three topics that we have picked up are also relevant and can bring into a more comprehensive and useful picture of what's going on in the Western Balkans, so that the Western international community partners can help us, both them and us, to move on in a proper direction, and, if I may say so, complete this great vision of Europe being whole, free, and at peace. So those three issues that we have highlighted are uncompleted processes of trials in front of domestic courts for crimes that are still not completed. We are not dwelling with the reconciliation. To me, it's too arbitrary and too broad concept. We would like to see governmental gestures. This is what's relevant. And to me, textbooks are also governmental gestures, just like continuation of trials for war crimes in front of domestic and regional courts. I don't know how to explain and how to define the newly set up court in Kosovo, but it has my full support, no matter what. The second issue, and this is the topic of this panel, what are the reforms that are missing? I think that the Balkans have gone in good direction with many reforms that have been required or expected, not imposed or forced on us, if we want to be part of the liberal and free and democratic world. And in Serbia, we have witnessed prioritization of the reform of the tax system and financial system and privatization. Now, in the last few years, there was this reform related to liberalization of the labor market and the conditions for the investments, which is all very needed. But I think we also have to finally address the issue of uncompleted processes of the security sector reforms in the region. And this is, again, where Montenegro case can be a good example for us, because it is not just that we have got the clear message by NATO that open door policy is live and kicking despite pressure coming from Russia and challenges, other challenges within NATO, within EU, within member states, and coming from abroad, but that actually the country has fulfilled some very painful issues and addressed these painful issues that the EU is still not tackling or doesn't want to, or it simply doesn't have tools to. So that there are two complementary processes, that EU and NATO integration are complementary. I would never say that you have to become member of NATO in order to become member of the EU. This is not fair. This is not good service towards NATO and member states. But I think at this point in time, becoming member of the NATO or working in more cooperation with NATO like Serbia has decided is actually buying time and framework, political framework, to continue with more demanding and elaborating reforms that the EU integration process rightly demands. And I think that this is the best option. And despite your comment that, you know, we are talking about this EU-NATO comparison, and there are some good messages coming from the Summit of Ministers of Foreign Affairs today from Brussels, that we have to put content into it, I think that the idea and decision to discuss in Belgrade significance of improving cooperation between EU and NATO is giving some kind of results, that this has filled in the media space and political space in a good manner, I hope so. So the third, one more important thing with regard to the security sector reform. There are no many legal ways in countries that peacefully transitioned after the conflicts from the authoritarian regimes to a process of consolidating their democracies like Serbia did, even Bosnia, to purge your security system from the perpetrators of crimes or those who were supporting it or who were setting up huge patronage networks of, you know, earning money on smuggling, using the security system reforms, but through these convictions and verdicts related to the trials for war crimes. And this is why they are also important. If the Western international community has and now is forced to cooperate more with the countries of the region, tackling newly emerging challenges like, you know, some consequences or threats that are coming from the migration and refugee flows in the last several years. So it is, I think, a mutual interest now to focus on these reforms, and it would be good if these reforms can be more streamlined, if there would be more coordination between member states, organizations, and donors with that regard. So these were two big problems that we added, or challenges that we added to the table, along with well-founded complaints that the EU is leaning towards just, you know, maintaining stability instead of pushing for more democratic reforms, addressing the problems with media, which does exist, no doubt of it. There is a democratic decline, you know, trend in Serbia and in the region, but yes, there are also some other positive trends coming. So how to balance those two and how to cut on the first one and improve on the second one, I think would be useful if we can agree on that. And the third underlying problem that we addressed is the fact that as a result of having just limited options available, the most countries of the region in these peace settlements that we got inherited, negotiated, actually, as a result, have overly politicized ethnicities. You are almost forced to be political Serb or political Croat or political Muslim or political Albanian in the region in order to articulate not only your identity affiliations, but other political affiliations. And it was maybe opportunistic as well. Even the Western international community has been using it to a certain extent to achieve some of its goals. And it was a bumper to do genuine consolidation of the region. Now it can become, I think, an issue that a hostile state and non-state actor can weaponize and abuse and turn against all of us. I will just give you some small examples. I don't want to be a boy who cries wolf, but Russia, oops, I said it, as Quality recently said in Washington. We have heard from the key Mr. Putin handler of the region, Sergei Železnjak, that he openly suggested to Srpska lista, Serbian MPs in Kosovo parliament, that they should actively obstruct, you know, adjustment and settlement of border dispute between Kosovo and Montenegro. We haven't heard that, a word of it from our president and prime minister who have influence on Srpska lista. We heard it from the Russian guys dealing with the region. And our report is full of this kind of examples where the current Russian authorities are actually trying to weaponize ethnicities in the region. And in the setup of uncompleted security sector reforms, well, some incidents can occur, and we have to be aware of it as well. So we have recommended member states, NATO and EU, to project more confidence in their own values and principles and strength and leverage in the region while being aware of not only issues deriving from refugee and migration flow and now maybe defeat of ISIS and potentials of radicalization in the region, but also of all these underlying problems that can be abused if not honestly and openly tackled. So how to tackle them and not to intimidate the current authorities in the region and still to explain to them that there are some issues that really have to be removed. I think that this combination of bold messages and explanations like no border exchange between Kosovo and Serbia, be aware of some other things. You can't sit on two chairs, and I think that it was friendly and timely delivered message by Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, United States. It was not, we are not talking here whether Serbia should support Roma or Milan or Barcelona or Madrid football clubs. We are talking whether Serbia, which formally declared to move towards EU and NATO, is adopting these values as well of democratic and free countries who are also willing to address problems that they are facing from inside as well, or whether Serbia is opting actually to become authoritarian state and to have revisionist Russia as the best friend forever. These are the choices. It's no choice between, I don't know, blue and red, what fits you better. So we have to be aware of that. I think that that kind of bold messages and incentives in terms of Serbia will just get 2 more chapters being opened in a few more days is so far, I think, the good combination. And it may come to surprise as many, in Serbia in particular, that I, who don't shy away from criticizing current government, would like to wrap up this part of my presentation with some good trends that are also somehow under the radar in Serbia. And oddly enough, I think that our current government is not promoting them to the extent that it should. We have witnessed several high-level meetings and agreements on improved cooperation between Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia that will develop further in the forthcoming period, and I really think it is very good signs coming from Romania and Bulgaria as well. Serbia is participating in EU battle groups. It is just has recently agreed to improve legal framework to send civilians into multinational missions, which are all good news. And NATO finally, I think, burst the bubble of this silence on a level of cooperation between Serbia and NATO, and maybe did good service to Serbian government by stepping up and doing that on behalf of Serbian government, which has its own share of responsibility for public diplomacy under the Individual Partnership Action Plan, and that we now see one positive spiral, that there is more relaxed atmosphere in which new actors can mention the fact that this cooperation exists and that there are grounds and beneficial benefits of improving it between Serbia and NATO, which was not the case until recently. And I think we have a reason to be, how did you put it, cautiously optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we still have some time, I guess. And 10 minutes, okay. So, audience can ask questions. Yes, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I'm Lazar Comunescu, former Foreign Minister of Romania and Ambassador to NATO and to the European Union. First of all, I would like to make a couple of comments, or if you so wish, questions formulated. But before that, I would like to thank very much to Ambassador Minuto for inviting me to participate in this conference, which is dealing with a topic of high interest for me as a person, but also for Romania. And there is yet another reason for me to have been very much pleased to be here, knowing that two of my former colleagues as foreign ministers and friends, Dmitry Rupel and Miro Kovac, are here in the panel. Well, my comments or questions, if you want. I fully share the view that as of now we witness a kind of a revigorated optimism with regards to the European and Euro-Atlantic, for those who wish, integration of the countries in Western Balkans. But in order to benefit of this window of optimism, I think that there are some aspects which we have to be sure that we have a very clear picture of that. The first is about to have a clear picture of what has been hindering so far the process. And that means to see, and here I'd like to hear the comments of the panelists, how much of these hindrances are, let's say, due to internal factors in the countries in the region and external factors. To weigh a little bit of that, it may be of interest for us because that would help in devising the best way to steps ahead. This is my first comment. Second, of course, we are here in an environment more NATO-related security. But when talking about security, we have to take into account that there is an extremely important economic dimension of security. And there as well, I think that there is need of, and I would like to hear the panelists commenting on that, how and what to do is so as to upgrade the economic progress in this region. Regional cooperation, a greater involvement by the European Union and the member states, and so on. And when I mentioned the regional cooperation, I think that there should be efforts to make use of new initiatives which are now being launched or developed, which may, I'm absolutely convinced that it will have an important impact also on the European perspective of the Western Balkan countries. I'm thinking that an initiative which was launched 2 years ago, the so-called 3C initiative. And 3C's initiative, it was an initiative launched by Croatia, and then there was a summit in Warsaw this year, and next one will be in Bucharest. I mentioned that because I think that it is extremely important to make efforts to devise regional projects, especially in infrastructure and so on. Last but not least, and I'm now mentioning that based on Romania's experience as well, I think that for devising the best steps ahead, one has to learn to take into account lessons learned from those countries which are already inside the European Union. And my friendly warning is to tell our friends, again, based upon the personal experience, one shouldn't think that once you reach the moment of accession, efforts to really integrate had stopped. There is no more to do. There is a lot more to do. So with this, I will conclude by mentioning also the importance of the close cooperation between the European Union and NATO. And here I think that the joint statement from Warsaw last year offers quite good prospects in this respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kovac will answer. Please.
Thank you, Minister. Briefly, concerning integration into the European Union and NATO, it's always about motivation. I'll give you an example of Croatia. The idea of becoming independent in Croatia was closely related, was in a correlation with the idea of Croatia becoming a member of the European Union and with the idea of becoming a member of NATO. It was a part of our project at the end of the 80s. And it was clearly said also in the address of our first president in his speech in front of the Croatian, in the Croatian Parliament in 1990 in May. So the third goal was integration into the European community. Due to the war, of course, it didn't happen. It didn't happen earlier. But it's clearly about motivation. In Slovenia, it was the same. The other republics in the former Yugoslavia were not so motivated when it comes to, in their programs, in the governing parties, when it comes to integration into NATO and the European Union. Economic progress. Economic progress, of course, can only be achieved if the structures of the societies concerned, if the structures of the economies in those societies are being adapted. Otherwise, there will be no substantial economic progress. The competition, I discussed it with Minister Ruppel at the hotel today, is very harsh, very brutal in the European Union. And our friends in the Western Balkans will easily come to conclude that it's very difficult once you are in the club. We witnessed the other day in Brussels the competition when it comes to two big agencies, the medicaments agency and the banking agency. And there was a tough competition, and Frankfurt, for instance, a strong Germany, a strong country, Frankfurt did not manage to become the seat for the banking agency. In the end, it was Paris. So Frankfurt was outperformed by Paris, by Germany, by France, because of the government crisis in Germany. So it's a tough competition. So the structures have to be adapted, they have to be changed, which is a very tough job. The Three Seas initiative is something, I would say, positive, but what has to be done clearly is what our friend Federica Mogherini said. We should, of course, at the meeting in Bucharest, include the European Commission, because the European Commission is supposed to finance certain projects, like, for instance, projects concerning energy security, and it would be stupid not to include, to integrate the European Commission into the work, into the projects of the Three Seas initiative. I'll give you an example. In Croatia, there's a Krk island, and there's a project to have an LNG terminal, and it's going to be funded by the European Commission by a structure which is called the Connecting Europe Facility with 102 million euros. So it's European money, and the Three Seas initiative was originally the Baltic Adriatic Corridor study devised by the Atlantic Council and related to projects of the European Union. So we have to include the European Commission to make this Three Seas initiative a success story. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Kuchikov.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would like just to a few sentences on regional cooperation, because I really believe that it's very important. In fact, I was chairing the Bulgarian presidency of SECP Southeast European Cooperation Process when the Regional Cooperation Council was created, was established in 2008. And it was very important to see how, at that time, Serbia and Kosovo were sitting together and signing the same document about the establishment of RCC 3 months after the Kosovo independence was declared. What is important from my point of view when we speak about regional cooperation is that in 20 years, although there were wars in that period, in 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we already have a kind of sense of belonging in the region, to the region. There is a feeling of and a search for regional ownership, and regional cooperation is deeply rooted already in the region, and that there is a kind of network of networks already created in the region that is a very fundamental, strong basis for peaceful relations and cooperation in the region.
Thank you. Other questions? None? So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and well, the show will continue after the break.